Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and I do mean welcome. Welcome to all the returning listeners, and welcome as well for anyone new who is tuning in for the first time. I do believe, folks, that I have a really solid show lined up for you today. Joining me, I'm going to jump right into this. Joining me today is let's say I'm host 1, so I'm going to call Eric host 1A, kind of like Le'Veon Bell and D'Angelo Williams. Mr. Steelers Grind himself, Eric Herman.
I always spell your name wrong, so it's good we're on radio. How you doing?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
You know what? I can't complain. We're getting ready for some football. We thought we were going to have some last Sunday, but that didn't end up happening. Epic fail by the NFL or the Pro Football Hall of Fame or whoever they want to blame. I guess Troy Vincent in this case is the one that's got his head on the chopping block. Apparently, he's taken responsibility for it. But
hey, paint can be tricky. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so we actually have football. NFL Network apparently is going to be broadcasting the Detroit Lions at the Pittsburgh Steelers this Friday at 7 o'clock Eastern. But before then, we wanted to talk some special teams. It is the third phase of football. We've already had you on the show before as my guest and I guess kind of my co-pilot, more or less, talking about the offense and defense. But we have to talk about special teams. And some of this is going to be tongue-in-cheek and kind of satire, but we do have some rules changes and stuff to go over in this particular episode. I know you're geeked up for this too, Eric.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So, without further ado, does it seem like Roger Goodell is always trying to tinker with something every single year when it comes to football? I don't think the guy wants kick returns in this game, and we're seeing it again this year. Originally, they got rid of the wedge back in 2009, the blocking wedge, which by definition, I'm going to read the actual kind of NFL dictionary definition. It involved 3 or more players blocking in tandem on kickoff returns, and it outlawed any more than 2 blockers within 2 yards of one another on the same plane in front of a kick returner, resulting in a 15-yard penalty. So basically, the wedge, it reminds you of the geese flying headed south, which is going to happen soon. That's gone. That's one of the first things the NFL experimented with. And then again, a few years later, this was in 2011, they moved the starting kickoff spot from the 30-yard line up to the 35. This was, of course, designed to increase the number of touchbacks or decrease the number of returns because the number of people getting hurt during kickoff returns, and particularly kickoff returns. This doesn't happen. It's not the same dynamic really as a punt return. There's some elements that are similar, but you already have pieces in motion and guys, it's different. It's different in ways. So, of course, we all know, just speaking about that Hall of Fame game that was canceled and talking about the turf being bad and then talking about special teams and kick returns, poor Sean Swayzem. That's pretty much what we have to say about that. But before this rule went into effect, it pretty much worked. Okay, so the number of kick returns in 2015 was the lowest in a non-strike season since the NFL-AFL merger. Before the rule change, teams returned 80.1% of all kickoffs. The number is now 41.1 or 2 in every 5. But still, the competition committee felt compelled that a touchback starting position needs to be changed to, instead of the 20-yard line this year, the 25 would alter what was essentially a 50-50 risk of bringing the ball out of the end zone from the previous 2011 rule change. So now a touchback, we're going to see something maybe a little bit different. They think that figure is going to be closer to 25% as to whether someone takes a knee or brings the ball out as opposed to before. But the one thing that has happened here is with the 5 yards that they're going to tack on here. It does change the game quite a bit because the teams that started on their own 20 had a touchdown percentage of 17.9, while those that started on the 25 were just a hair better at 20.8, almost a full 3 percentage points, 2.9% better. So the grand question here is, what are the Steelers on the cutting edge? Are they the trendsetters? I was talking about innovation on the last episode of the Steel City Underground Podcast, and we have no clear-cut kick returners right now, but of course, 7th-round pick Dree Archer has been selected, presumably to be a return man, maybe even possibly replace Antonio Brown. Eric, you want to talk about Antonio Brown returning punts for a second before we come back to the whole kick return scenario here?
Yeah, the Antonio Brown thing has been a whole mess because some people think, DeMarcus Ayers, we drafted him, so clearly he's the answer. Some people like Eli Rogers. He was the camp standout last year, got hurt. Some people are calling for Artie Burns, Marcus Wheaton. They're basically saying anyone who's fast and athletic should be returning punts and kicks, but not Antonio Brown. But I know I've been on the fence about this because there are good points on both sides. One side, you want your playmaker back there. You want the best man to do the position. On the other hand, you don't want your star player getting hurt doing something it seems silly to some people that you have your star being a kick returner. But after just seeing all these debates and reading and trying to just do my own thinking, I'm kind of on the side that keep your star playmaker back there. Because I've seen the stats too where I don't think there's been a major kick return injury for the Steelers since the early 2000s. And when you do watch Antonio Brown do all the punt returns, he's not stupid. He's not taking every punt and trying to get every yard possible or sticking his head down. He's fair catching the ball whenever it seems like the smart move. He's not afraid to go out of bounds when it seems necessary. And he hasn't really done anything to make it appear like he's going to hurt himself doing this job.
Yeah, and that's kind of my thought process as well with the whole Antonio Brown deal. And I just realized I did say Dree Archer, and that's because I'm reading my notes. I'll get back to the kick return thing in a second because Dree Archer's name is going to come up. So is another popular name that we must, Eric, when we talk, we have to bring up Brandon Boykin. I'm going to do so again because he was, I know, he was returning punts. And he was a punt returner, I think, in Philadelphia, or at least he used to be in college, and we knew he had that capability. And for whatever reason, the Steelers still did not want – they were willing to go out and get Jacoby Jones and try and experiment there with Jacoby returning punts as opposed to even using Brandon Boykin in that capacity. And one of the things was – we were talking about some of the other major players, and we'll get to that, some of the guys that return punts. We actually talked about that last week on the roundtable. You have guys like Patrick Peterson and Golden Tate and players of that nature that are still returning punts. I mentioned Tim Brown. That's the one that always sticks in my head because he was always good at returning punts. But Antonio Brown doesn't return kicks anymore. They relieved him of that duty. He made the Pro Bowl being the all-purpose kick and punt return guy several years ago. That was before he was rewarded with the big contract. Once he got the money, they took him off the kick return unit entirely, and now he just returns punts. And he is an impact player. Antonio Brown is definitely someone with the vision of the field that can take it to the house anytime he touches it. And if he doesn't, he just avoids the contact. You see him run out of bounds often. You see, like you said, he'll take a fair catch. He's very, very football smart. I don't think anyone's ever going to question his IQ when it comes to the football field. But then again, the Steelers, I think, are still maybe a bit concerned. And there was a few things that Danny Smith had to say. When I was talking in the 7th round pick, I meant to say DeMarcus Ayers from this year, but they tried to force this issue once before. I think the Steelers are trying to be on the cutting edge. You see that they are attempting more 2-point conversions than any other team in the NFL. And they selected Dree Archer, and I think they wanted Dree Archer to return punts or kicks too, because he seems to me, when I saw this DeMarcus Ayers pick, that's why I said Dree Archer. It almost comes to mind as the same thing, except Dree Archer being a 3rd-round pick was quite a hefty price to pay for a player who didn't pan out in that same type of capacity. So the 7th-round pick isn't as much of a risk, but I'm wondering if maybe you're going to see some of these teams possibly attempt to kind of kick the ball short and dare teams to just kind of take it out. I would have I almost had that gut feeling the Steelers were doing that with Sean Sweejum. Anytime you ever saw him kick off, I always wondered if he could reach the back of the end zone. You watch these other teams, they just boot it out the back of the end zone. They're almost kicking field goals from, what did I say, the 35-yard line now. And I always saw Sweejum kind of kicking it a little short, almost daring people to come out and see if they could cut it short of the 20. Now that the reward is the 25 for taking a knee, I got to wonder if we don't see what I think I termed it in the article I wrote, a sky kick, kind of just pooching it up in the air and seeing if you can't trap someone from the 24 or less, which would be a net positive for your defense, versus if you kick it in the end zone or through the back of the end zone. And now the team now has about a 1 in 5 chance of scoring a touchdown according to the statistics.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's a guarantee that this rule change is going to make kick returns lower, because like you're saying, you may see people do the sky kicks where they do it high and short, and it could land anywhere from the 5 to the 10. And those players have to make a split-second decision. Do I just let this ball bounce, or do I want to take it out for the big gain? So I wouldn't be surprised at all if teams start doing that more often than just booting it out.
Yeah, and I'm wondering maybe the Steelers, like I was saying, it didn't work out with Dre Archer. They're going to try this again maybe with DeMarcus Ayers, and potentially maybe they are innovators, trendsetters, and on the cutting edge. So the other thing I wanted to bring up in this was a few Danny Smith quotes that he had to say about DeMarcus Ayers. And if you're not familiar with Danny Smith, I know you are, Eric, but for our listeners, he is our special teams coach there in Pittsburgh. And he was quoted as saying, "This is a dynamic kid, DeMarcus Ayers. I'm excited about it, very excited about it. He's an excellent punt returner. We had him rated number 1 on our list as far as returners were concerned. Not taking into play wide receiver skills in this setting. He is outstanding. He does a great job. He has a lot of special skills. We're excited about it." So it's pretty interesting because then when Danny Smith's asked as to whether or not Antonio Brown would be removed, because remember, this is the top guy on their board, fell to them in the 7th round, their top guy as far as a kick or punt return specialist. He says, "You asked the wrong guy that question about removing Brown." Well, I think he would be the right guy, but they're not gonna say anything that they have to backpedal on. He goes, "I'm coaching that position. I'm a team guy, and this is a team organization if there ever was one." And he discusses the Jacoby Jones experiment. And he says, "At that particular time, we made that decision to make the change. After that meeting, Antonio Brown came to my office very distinctly and said, 'Danny, I don't like it.' My honest comment was, 'Antonio Brown, I don't like it either.'" I don't know that he would have called him Antonio Brown by full name. Do you think Antonio AB? "I don't like it either, but that's what we're going to do." And that's what we did. It didn't work, and we went back to Antonio Brown. But you can never have enough of these kinds of guys. And I think that's where the Ayers things really fits in, because like I said, Tim Brown was always one of those guys who did it both. And you have many of other players, as you listed in your particular article. You had a few others here. I was pulling up Emmanuel Sanders. We remember that name.
We do.
Yeah, he still does both. Jarvis Landry, obviously the wide receiver 1 in Miami. He's pulling double duty there as well. And then, of course, Pac-Man Jones and Tavon Austin. So there's several players. It's not maybe profound throughout the league, but it's not something that isn't heard of. And in fact, in Arizona, the one guy that's getting a lot of buzz right now is running back David Johnson. David Johnson was also a kick and punt returner Patrick Peterson was the punt returner. I should go back on that. But David Johnson was actually returning kicks too, because I do believe he scored on special teams last year. So it's just...
Yeah, I do know about that because I started watching All or Nothing, the Amazon Prime thing, and I already watched that episode where David Johnson, I think it was his maybe the third game of the season, or at least his first or second time playing. He had like 105 or so yard kick return for a touchdown. It was an Arizona Cardinals record for doing that, and he was the first player to ever have a running touchdown, passing touchdown, and a kick return touchdown in a player's first 2 games.
Yeah, I forgot you were watching that show. We were talking about that off the air, and what
perfect
timing!
It's so cool.
What perfect timing for the conversation. So that's good. That's good, because a lot of times I come up with things, I'm thinking about it. I have to mention right now, and I was joking about this. I did not hear back from you, Ben, but Ben Anderson from Steel City Blitz. He messages me from time to time in private messages, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or texting me or however he gets a hold of me. And I joked with him the other day, and I said, if you're familiar with PTI, or Pardon the Interruption, at the end of the show on ESPN with Tony Kornheiser and whoever they happen to find to be his opposite now, and they have the guy that corrects all the stats or just make sure he reaffirms things that may have been said that weren't. My mind's like always a mile a minute, so sometimes I don't make the point I was necessarily trying to make. And Ben makes sure that he makes that point. And I said, you know what you need to do? You just need to listen to my podcast and then like record like a minute or two, just like PTI does, and correct everything. So it's good that you had that, because I'm sure Ben was already thinking of it and writing notes on a notepad somewhere, or maybe even had his keyboard out and he was already sending the message as he's listening to this. So, hey, Ben, a shout out to you. You could follow Ben on Twitter. We're always jawing back and forth with him, and also Steel Dad over at Steel City Blitz. But back on the subject, we were talking about this Arizona Cardinals show, and actually we have an episode of Hard Knocks now to watch as well with the LA Rams. I think that is a really great decision for the NFL and the league to put the spotlight on the Rams, not necessarily because they're a great franchise, but they are in transition, and it's going to get a lot of people in LA excited about football again, because I don't necessarily know, there's probably like a whole generation of fans that just did not care about the LA Rams, but there's the generations before that who did have that team. So I think that's going to be a really good thing to see. And of course you have the rookie quarterback and et cetera, et cetera. Did
you see though that Jared Goff isn't even the starter this week, or in their first game?
You know, that's expected. And if you remember Jeff Fisher, when he first came into the league and he was coaching the Houston Oilers, and oh man, the name is going to escape me now, but he sat Steve McNair for an entire year before he actually played him. Now, I don't think he has that much time, being that the team moved to LA, and being that there's much more invested in trading up and getting that pick for that top overall quarterback, first round quarterback, than there was maybe when McNair came to town down there in Houston, and then eventually when they moved to Tennessee. So I think Jeff is just kind of doing that to say, hey, you've got to earn it. And I guess that's the way I'd probably do it too. Another thing is, I'm not sure, that's a lot of pressure if you put Jared Goff out there and you put him out with the ones and he immediately fails. He doesn't do good. Now, you learn by failing. I don't have a problem with them trying to get this guy on the field, but sometimes the situations are awful for quarterbacks. You see it happen in Cleveland, where RG3 is now the 25th starting quarterback since 1999 there. And
love it. I love it.
And when we talk with Nathaniel Bodner, hopefully we get the round table in a few days to preview this preseason game against the Lions. And we'll get together, Eric, and hopefully we get everyone together on this. We're going to be talking about RG3 because Nathaniel is just gung-ho and thinks that he's kind of almost a Browns fan. He sounds like my wife, excited about RG3. You know what? I want to see the guy do well myself. I don't have that much animosity towards him, and he really just he bit his lip and just took what was given to him in Washington, sat there on the bench. Very, very humble guy. Seems to have his head on straight. Let's see what he can do. Hopefully he's in the right situation. I think at least with Hugh Jackson there as a coach, probably has a little more chance to succeed. Although when they did have Kyle Shanahan, I think they made a huge error in just letting him walk. But then again, they're sending text messages to the guy trying to tell him how to do his job, which I was complaining about on one of the last week's episodes with cheating and whatnot. So we've dovetailed from the Arizona Cardinals on Amazon Prime to Hard Knocks to talking about the Browns and all these quarterbacks. What we really need to get on with is talking about the punter, because punters are people too.
Yeah. Jordan Berry, you got to talk about him.
Yeah, if you saw the crazy thing I put together on SteelCityUnderground.com, and it was also republished over at Behind the Steel Curtain, I documented all 72 punts, including, that's the 16 regular season games and the 2 playoff games that the Steelers played, in which Jordan Berry, all 72 punts are listed there. And you go back, you may have to search, because I actually had to do a search on my site. I didn't realize I published this in the middle of last month, but you look at some of the statistics, and I just don't think that punt statistics necessarily tell the same story. Like, you could look at Antonio Brown and you say, oh, he caught that many balls. And you could look at some guys and say, well, he had 90 targets and only caught 25 of them. He sucks. He can't catch. Okay, that's true. But when you're looking at some of the punt statistics, there's so many different things that factor in. A lot of it's field position. You're not going to try and kick the ball 50 yards if it's going to sail into the end zone for a touchback. That's just something that's not going to happen. So I think a lot of people get what's in their recent memory. Some fans, of course, everybody is watching the playoff games. I mean, there's nothing up against them or opposes them unless you want to watch, I don't know, Dr. Phil's on the other channel or something at the same time. So those games pretty much run unopposed, like your primetime night games. So when people see somebody like Jordan Berry shank a punt or two in that Denver Broncos playoff game, it's not really indicative of his full season. The guy has got a cannon for a leg. I thought he did probably the best of any punter we've had maybe this decade. I'm going to be that bold in saying that, even though I think Drew Butler is still kicking in Steelers West, which, can you affirm that from the Amazon Prime if they showed Drew Butler on that Arizona
Believe it or
Cardinals
not, All or Nothing has not covered Drew Butler. They've covered, actually they did do a section now, I'll go on a quick tangent, of how many Steelers they have. I think their defensive line coach was a former Steeler, and maybe their defensive back coach or the wide receiver coach. They have a lot of coaching staff that was former Steelers over there.
Okay, here we go. Arizona Cardinals coaching staff via NFL.com.
Ooh.
And for more information on assistant coaches, go to azcardinals.com. Okay, let's do that. And while we're waiting for that to pull up, speaking of Drew Butler, he was 29th in the league in net yards per punt. And, of course, Jordan Berry was 30th, I believe, as I'm pulling this up. Yes, he was 30th amongst punters and yards per punt, 42.6. Of course, the Rams, Johnny Hecker, I think is how you pronounce his name, he was leading everyone with 47.9. But the guys that are like all the top punters in this statistic are on teams that are terrible. And of the top,
because the offense can't do anything, so they got to punt it.
Yeah, the top 10, only one played for a playoff qualifying team, and that was Shane Leckler from Houston with the Texans, and they barely made the playoffs. They were the 6th seed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
then
J.J. Watt took them to the playoffs.
Well, pretty much. And I was just listening to something about that too. But I think I have our Arizona Cardinals. So I'm looking here. Let's see. Brenston Buckner, defensive line, former Steeler.
Yep, that's what I was talking about.
Larry Foote, inside linebackers coach. Levon Kirkland is another outside linebackers coach. Let's see. Freddie Kitchens, that also sounds familiar. Possibly. I'm sure Ben will come on and do that. Nope. Kevin Ross is a cornerbacks coach. And so that appears to, I think that covers all the bases, of course, besides Bruce Arians. I'm sure there may be more, but I'm just leafing over this real quick with Steelers West there. But getting back on the topic of punters or people, it's, yeah, Drew Butler. And then they also canned Brad Wing and sent him to the Giants. So Brad Wing was only ranked 22nd, and he wasn't much better. But the question I had posed was, if Ben Roethlisberger always got the ball on their opponent's 20-yard line, and they were in the red zone, how many passing yards would he throw in a year? He wouldn't have very many, because he's either throwing for touchdowns or he's going to hand it off. Maybe he throws like a 6-yard pass and then somebody runs it in. Bell or Williams runs it in from like 14 or 17 yards here or there. Or maybe he does throw one in the end zone for 10 yards. The yards wouldn't pile up very quick. He wouldn't be throwing bombs down the field. So it's kind of just, you have to picture it in the same light as something like that with the starting field position, and just trying to pin those teams, like I said, those percentages with the kick returns. Well, that's just not on kick returns. That's just in general with starting field position when it comes to those statistics. So do you want somebody to have maybe a 1 in 5 chance, or do you want somebody to have less than that, maybe 3% less chance if you get them into 20? And of course, as you back them up further, the least likely that they're going to march all the way down the field and score. Makes a lot of sense to me. And if you want to check this out, the reason I'm probably mentioning this more than I would any other article, it took me an awful long time to put and compile all of this together. So what you'll see if you find this article I'm going to link to it in the show notes, actually. You'll see the opponent for that game, the line of scrimmage, when the punt was kicked, the distance it traveled, whether it was returned or the result of that, and then the opponent's line of scrimmage. And you'll actually see when you end up going through all of it, I think about half of them or better were inside the 20. In fact, it was 33 of them put the opposing offense within their own 20. And that figure actually represents nearly half of Jordan Berry's punts when you consider an additional 7 plays on special teams were moved outside of the 20 due to good returns. That could be out-kicking your coverage or just poor coverage, missed tackles, or penalties. So there's a handful of plays there that may have impacted Jordan Berry looking as stellar as I thought he was. And, of course, he was a rookie last year. Like any player, he's got to gain experience. You just can't keep changing these guys like we change our underwear.
Yeah, it's kind of like players like Cockrell. It's like now they actually have an off season to train, to be with the organization, get proper coaching. So you never know the jump they'll make. It could be significant, could be marginal, but actually having an off season with this team could help them out a lot.
Yeah, and that's pretty much, that exactly. I have nothing else further to add to it. It's just, hey, if he's a rookie, is he going to know more than a second-year guy? So he has 2 camps, and he won the job, and we'll see. A lot of people think Will Monday is actually a really good punter, and he's in camp. The only thing that really worries me, believe it or not, speaking of the special teams here, and we're going to get into special teams predictions, believe it or not. This was by request, and this seems silly, and it probably will be silly, as I mentioned, to kick off the show. But kick off, there you go, pun intended. So the only thing that really worries me, and the guy who would be taking the kickoffs, Chris Boswell, is unopposed in camp. They didn't bring anyone else in to compete with him, and it's like, oh my goodness, did we learn our lesson from last year? Just please grab someone as an insurance policy. I don't want to jinx the guy, but Chris Boswell should be instructed to kick the ball on a kickoff and then just proceed to turn 90 degrees and run to his bench after picking up the tee. And that's what I would tell him to do. There's no reason to risk it, especially when we went through the Josh Scobie experiment. I had some New England fans still running their mouth. It's like if that guy could have hit some field goals, those games may have been a little bit different, among a few other things. You do need 11 players on the field. But speaking of these predictions, Jordan Berry was my first pick here as the overachiever because I do think he will probably do better than last year, which was maybe an average or above average job as a punter, regardless of those net yards per punt. Like I said, a lot of the playoff teams, their punter wasn't in, like they were in the bottom maybe half or bottom quarter of the league as far as that statistic. So it's really meaningless. I can't talk any more about Jordan Berry. I just think he's going to be better. It sounds like I'm his cheerleader. I might just go out and get a custom jersey made. So, Eric, you have an overachiever for us with our special teams predictions.
Yeah, my guy I'm going with is Anthony Chickillo. And Chickillo is a guy, he's gotten a lot of buzz during training camp. And people are saying he's like in the best shape of his life. He's happy to be in the position he's always wanted to do. And he's just beating guys left and right, and he's almost looking like a star. And I'm not the kind of person who wants to just overreact and fangirl over training camp performances because a lot of these guys are going against second team, and you never know the circumstances they're in. But I do believe that Chickillo is going to have a good year because I think he was my guy in our defensive predictions. I said he'd overachieve as well. And I think his main issue is that he will play well, but it might be hard for him to see the field because we already have Harrison, Moats, Jones, and Dupree. So since he might have trouble actually getting on the playing field, I think he's going to put a lot of his effort and energy into special teams and try and make as much noise as possible and have as big of an impact as possible. And we even saw this with the Cleveland game last year. I think that was one of his first games where he actually got to play and he forced a fumble.
Yeah, I do have high hopes for him as well. I think you're absolutely right. If it's any indication with a fellow 6th-round pick, Antonio Brown, made his mark on special teams, still making his mark on special teams. I'm going to be talking about another guy, well, many guys like this, because this is, after all, special teams predictions. And I'm just going to go with the other kicker with Chris Boswell here as my underachiever. And there's only one real reason I think Chris Boswell will underachieve. No, I don't think he's going to be Josh Scobie this year. It's all of this talk with Ben Roethlisberger running his mouth about doing 2-point conversions. I don't know that Chris Boswell is going to be taking very many kicks unless he's kicking field goals. And if these guys want to score 30 points a game, Chris Boswell may not even kick in a game other than kickoffs.
I think people are just overhyping this whole thing.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I have Antonio Brown as my X factor because a lot of people have high expectations, but I think an X factor is a guy who can return a punt for a touchdown, just like Jacoby Jones won that one game at Heinz Field several years ago for the Ravens by taking it to the house. I think it was 13-7 final score or something like that. It was the Byron Leftwich game, and that was the separation. It was all determined on a punt return for a touchdown. And if Antonio Brown does that and they get a win in the win column, I guess where else would a win be, then that's the only guy I really could put as the X factor, though I assume you have someone different in that category.
Oh, I have the biggest X factor for this team, Greg Warren. Because who's the player that if he goes down in special teams, everybody's screwed? That's Greg Warren. We saw it a couple years ago, and I think it was James Harrison. Am I right, Joe? He had to go be a long snapper, and they hiked the ball and ended up being a safety.
Yeah, and I had that video. I had to replay one of those, and that was the same game he got hurt. And now I got to go back and find out what video that was. It was one of the highlights that I'm posting so many of these things now. They all kind of run together. But yeah, you're right. I think James Harrison, kind of like Heath Miller, was the emergency quarterback last year too. So it seems pretty funny, but we have seen James Harrison in the backfield too on offense. So it's funny. Greg Warren gets mentioned once again on the Steel City Underground podcast. We love Greg Warren, one of the few Steelers still remaining on this roster who has a Super Bowl ring. I think there's 5 guys total, Ben Roethlisberger, of course, being one of them. And then a pair of guys who were drafted Mike Tomlin's first year, Lawrence Timmons and William Gay. And now, of course, Eric, since I took a break to go look up the other guy, I forgot who it was. Who was it? James Harrison. That's right. Did I say James Harrison already? Okay, so those are the 5 guys. You got Ben Harrison, Greg Warren, Lawrence Timmons, and William Gay. And yeah, how can you not love Greg Warren? We mentioned Greg Warren's been getting a lot of love on the show. We mentioned him on the roundtable last week. I think he's kind of a year-to-year guy. And unfortunately, whoever comes in to do long snapping in the preseason, they're kind of auditioning maybe for another team unless something were to happen to Greg Warren, like we had mentioned when he got hurt and was replaced by Harrison for that brief period of time. So continuing on our special teams subject here, I'm going to find, let's see, we mentioned the X factor, but we did not mention the hot seat. And the hot seat would probably be a little opposite than our last topic, which would be the roster bubble, but they do kind of blend together. I have more than one name in one category, but on the hot seat, I'm more or less looking at a guy that's been there for a while, that's only been a special teams contributor, maybe has not hit his stride as contributing to offense or defense, and could likely be replaced and not find himself on the active roster come September. And of course, he has gotten a lot of flack from me, and that is Shamarko Thomas, the only guy to commit the 2 interference penalties that exist in the NFL, and he actually committed one of them twice. He was the only Steeler to commit those special teams penalties, and he committed it 3 times, one of them twice. Just absolutely mind-blowing. I think the clock is ticking on Shamarko. I'm going to be interested in seeing what he does come Friday and these few first preseason games, because he may have a little bit of competition in order to stick around on special teams. If he makes a mistake on special teams, and the only good thing that he actually did do was he made a mistake and had his foot out of bounds, which saved the Steelers bacon in that one game. It was the Danny Trevathan return. I'm thinking what would be return, and he was actually standing out of bounds and touched the ball, and it was more than likely 100% accidental that all the planets aligned and ended up saving the Steelers' butt there. But who do you have on the hot seat? Because I know we were bouncing around some names off the air here. You have Shamarko as well, and maybe somebody else.
Yeah, my guy I'm going with is Ross Ventrone. And my reasoning for this is I've been reading people's training camp like recaps and tweets, and a lot of people are saying that when Sean Davis or Mike Mitchell aren't in the field, it's Shamarko Thomas. He's the next man up. And I know you have great points where you say Shamarko screws up a lot and makes a lot of mental errors, but can't deny the fact that he's been getting more reps than Ross Ventrone on defense. And the reason I say it's significant is because since Senquez Golson went down, Sean Davis has to be in the slot, and that makes it so if Mitchell or Golden goes down, Thomas is the next man up, which I imagine the coaching staff is not very comfortable with. So it's definitely possible and definitely going to happen that the coaching staff is going to watch the waiver wire, see who teams cut, and try and get a veteran or a young guy they really like. And if they do get another safety, there's certainly a chance that one of the safeties on our roster is going to get cut. Because I think in my article where I kind of documented the counts of each position over the past couple of years, I'm pretty sure we've had 5 safeties for 4 or 5 years. So between Shamarko Thomas and Ross Ventrone, I just feel like because Shamarko is seen as a better player on defense than Ross Ventrone, even though it's arguable who's better on the special teams, I think Ross Ventrone to get the boot over Shamarko Thomas for a veteran who can actually come in and play on the field and be able to help this defense. And Sean Davis won't be able to play safety as much since he'll likely be playing a lot of nickel for us.
Yeah, and you had written the article too, and we still have a little bit of love for Will Allen, maybe lost a step. We're always misquoting his age, 33, 34, but he's still kind of sitting out there in a maybe break the glass in case of emergency type role. Would definitely be all right to have as veteran depth, but I know the Steelers have to be smart with their roster spots, looking ahead to the future, and also how they spend whatever little money they still have under the cap should somebody else get hurt and they have to sign. I don't want to mention any positions and jinx anyone, so I'm not going to mention a position, but in case that does happen, it was very similar to the article I wrote yesterday about Senquez Golson and the whole situation around him and not being placed on the injured reserve or anything yet. And of course, even if they do, if somebody else ends up on injured reserve, they can only designate one of those guys to come back. So you may not see Senquez Golson the entire year. And I think that's why they're kind of biting the bullet on exactly what to do. But I don't think they could actually hold a spot for him either. They got to just see what the diagnosis is. And like me and you texting back and forth, and I'm like, really? We still don't know how long it's going to be. But I was actually speaking about this, and the last time me and you talked, we brought up a former player from Pitt who had a really good pro day. He's a little more undersized, but he is in camp. He was signed to the futures contract with the Steelers, Ray Vinipal. And I had, of course, the high school connection where Ray went to school, the boss that's one of the alumni there, asking me what's Ray's chances of maybe making this team. And for all the reasons you just mentioned, and not seeing somebody like a Will Allen come back yet or any moves on a waiver wire, I think that Ray could be one of these guys that if he impresses enough, if he gets some time in the secondary against, these third and fourth string preseason only players, the camp bodies, and he impresses enough, and he also plays solidly on special teams. The guy is jacked. If you've ever seen him, he is this really jacked white kid with veins popping out of his arms. He actually benched, I think it was 26 times of this pro day. He was benching more than a lot of the offensive linemen were benching. He put up that thing 26 times, and he's also been clocked as fast or faster than Sean Davis and Artie Burns in the 40, depending on whose numbers that you want to take now. I think it was a 4.6, and I want to say that Burns and Davis were a 4.58. Now Ray was not invited to the combine 2 years ago, so this was a pro day, and sometimes I think the pro day numbers, they're off or whatever. And of course, if you get these numbers from college coaches, they're going to pad it here or there and make the guys look. But he's definitely in that sub 4.6 category, regardless. I think as fast as a 4.4. I believe I was reading on some of the scouting reports with Ray. And, of course, being the hometown guy playing for Pittsburgh before, It's got to be cool for him to put on a black and gold jersey and maybe get at least one or two more cracks at stepping on the field there at Heinz. That's got to be really awesome. My other guy, of course, for the roster bubble on the special teams, since I had two of them, was Travis Feeney. I think you and I were talking as to whether or not you did the article with how many linebackers they keep. The most they ever keep is like 10. I see like 11 guys on this roster, and somebody's going to be on the outside looking in. Travis is going to have to be the tackling machine he's known for. I think he's another one of these guys that's like a hybrid player that they're trying to figure out exactly where he may fit, but he's solely going to be a special teams guy if he does make this roster. So that's where he's going to have to earn his paycheck for 2016. Who's your roster bubble guy?
Yeah, the guy I'm going with is another draft pick this year. I'm going with Tyler Matakovich. And kind of like how you were saying, this linebacker group is just congested. You have Steven Johnson, LJ Fort, Anthony Chickalo, Travis Feeney, and Matakovich, and all the other guys I'm forgetting. And it's hard because they're showing a lot of promise, a lot of talent, but you can't keep them all. So I think Matakovich actually is facing an uphill battle right now because it is true he's flashed in camp. I saw he had an interception the other day, and he's been a tackling machine like he's been in college. But he, like you were saying, he's going to have to make his money on special teams.
Yes,
and I think it's certainly possible for him to do well since he showed he can be a tackling machine. So obviously he has good field vision. He should be able to maneuver through and do well. But I just think he's facing an uphill battle. And although I'm kind of off the Travis Feeney train I was before, since he's been hurt and hasn't really shown anything, I think Matakovich does have an edge over Feeney. So I think his biggest opponent right now is LJ Fort. It seems those players are basically doing a battle to see if they can both make it, and maybe they both make it, but it'll be close.
Yeah, LJ Fort, one of your mystery players that you had listed in an article on SteelCityUnderground.com. If you don't know about LJ and a few others, as we're calling, in fact, any of these names that we mentioned are good candidates for this article, and they're also going to be featured later in a future episode of the Steel City Underground podcast. One of the reasons that maybe Monday's show was all over the place, and the only name I did bring up was Tyler Matakovich, because there was a big to-do, I think, with the Friday Night Lights and him doing spin moves and being called Dirty Red. We found out is his nickname, and the guy's had over 100 tackles in each of his 4 seasons at Temple. So, it's another one of these late draft picks that could pan out, but he's going to have to be a special teams contributor. But regardless, Eric, that was a little bit of fun. It's a little bit out of the ordinary. I'm not sure if anyone else is making special teams predictions. Of course, we're not saying who's going to make the most extra points. We've already discussed that Chris Boswell may not be kicking any this year, so that kind of puts him even out of the contention. You may even see Ben line up for one on a fake 2-pointer or something, and like 2-point conversion. Could they even do that? I don't think
bring
you
up
could.
Ben for push punts, so
yeah, that would be very interesting. He was turning into Slash there for a while, but once again, great having you back on, Eric. It was a long time before the last one we had you on, and now it's awesome to have you maybe a lot more frequently here, and hopefully we can do the Lions preview together too. And once again, thank you, Eric, for joining me on the show. You can follow Eric at his Twitter handle, Steelers Grind. And, of course, he's always communicating with me, probably 24/7. I have to actually shut my phone off. But and if you want to communicate, folks, and if you'd like to tell us who you're most looking forward to seeing in the preseason game coming up on Friday, call the Steel City Underground Hotline. That's 203-900-4SCU. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.